Hey, this is Chris with Phoenix Gaming, and we're going to get back to our roots a little bit here, and we're going to take a deep dive into one of my favorite orc models. We're going to talk about Deff Dreads. First, we're going to look at the data sheet, and then we'll discuss what my preferred loadouts are, and then my thoughts on usage, and, just things that we could maybe do to make it better if GW were so inclined. And then we'll kind of talk about its overall rating, where I think it fits within the context of the orc index, not within the context of the game. So let's take a look at its data sheet. It does move 8 inches. It is T9 with a 2-up save, a 6-up invuln, and 8 wounds with a leadership of 7, like most orc units, and an OC of 3. I will say that the 6-up invuln is kind of irrelevant with a 2-up save. It's not terrible. It does come into play on occasion, but it's not as necessary as it would have been maybe in 9th edition. Especially now that it has a 2-up save. If it had a 3-up save, absolutely. It does come equipped with 2 big shooters and 2 dread claws. All the weapons are free. You can see it has access to the custom mega blasta, which gets 3 shots at 9 -2 d6 damage. The rocket launcher, which is d3 shots with blast at 9 -2 3 damage. And then the Scorcha, which is just d6 auto hits at 5/1/1 with torrent and ignore cover. The Dreadclaw is probably where you want to be at with it. It gets 4 base attacks at 10/2/3. The Dreadclaw has a special rule called Dead Choppy, so each additional claw you take gives you 1 additional attack. And this is very similar to how Deff Dreads have always interacted. If you have 1 claw, you get 4 attacks. 2 claws is 5. 3 claws is 6. 4 claws is 7. And then obviously you get the additional attack on the wall. So that's just all things to keep in mind when you're looking at this. If you decide for whatever reason you want to give it all guns, it will have Stompy Feet, and it will get 4 attacks at 5/0/1. Its ability is at the start of the fight phase, each enemy unit within engagement range takes a battle shock test. We'll touch on that a little bit later, but that's the same thing the Incubi do, and I'm not a big fan of any ability that is predicated on forcing battle shock tests, but we'll talk about why when we kind of dive into that. Basically, you can give it any kind of loadout you want. You could give it 4 Dread Claws, 4 Custom Mega Blastas, 4 Rocket Launches, 4 Scorches, or any combination thereof, like 2, 2, or like 1 of each. It doesn't matter. You get to kind of mix and match and do whatever you want with it, which that is kind of cool because that's not something that you're seeing as much in 10th edition, where it's just like, oh, I get to do whatever I want with my unit. My preferred loadout is, I think Dreadclaws are great. It's some of the only melee in the index that's higher than 2 damage. And to me, that's where the Orc index especially, but also 10th edition is just kind of not my favorite, is that melee doesn't really do much. And we're talking about a unit that has historically been very good in melee. And, 3 damage is pretty good. I'm not complaining about it. But the -2 is kind of rough, Rockets are, in my opinion, they're just not worth taking. They're D3 with blast. They're strength 9, so you're wounding a rhino on 4s. And it just, like, if you're trying to shoot something that's already engaged, you're not able to because of blast. If you're engaged, you're -1 to hit, so you're hitting on 6s. So I just don't think the rockets are worth putting on the Deff Dread. I think the custom Mega Blastas, if you're gonna put a gun on it, that's one of the guns you take. The hazardous rule could be kind of, bad for you because, man, if you fail a bunch of hazardous checks, you're just picking it up. But all in all, I think the KMBs are a better option than the rockets because you get consistently 3 shots. They're strength 9, they're -2, they're d6 damage. So they're less consistent on the damage, but they're more consistent on the volume. And because it doesn't have blast, you can shoot it whatever you want to. If you take big shooters, you're going to get to throw a lot of dice, but they're not really going to do anything. I would just give it Scorches over the big shooters. Yes, the range is lower, but they auto hit, so you get to circumvent that ballistic skill 5, and ignore cover with -1 is about as good as a -2 attack, right? with the way cover works in 10th, most of the time things are getting cover if you're playing against an opponent that knows how to use terrain. So my preferred loadout is 2 or 3 claws and then 1 or 2 scorches. Like I said, the auto hits are real handy, and ballistic skill 5 kind of sucks. So the auto hits kind of help, like I said, circumvent that. You can bring them out of reserves and just shoot a unit. If you're going against some sort of elf or even into Marines, you're still forcing 4-up saves with the shooting. So all in all, like my take is a couple scorches, 2 at the most, 2 to 3 claws. That's the sweet spot right now. I think it suffers from a lot of the same issues that pretty much the whole index suffers from, and that's especially the shooting side of the Ork index. That's like there's not a ton of guns or really attacks in general that are over -2 AP, and with cover being as prevalent as it is, it means you're going to be -1 most of the time. And like I said, ballistic skill 5, we all know it's bad. And when we played in 8th, and Orks were the only army that could auto hit on 6s, right? Ballistic skill 5 didn't feel that bad with as much -1 to hit as there was out there. As we move from 8th, when everything had sustained hits, and into 9th, where everything lost sustained hits, we don't have really any assault weapons anymore, so there's not a lot of advance and shoot. It just has become very apparent that we're not supposed to take a lot of guns to games. We're supposed to be bringing just melee. And really, 9th edition especially was kind of you play the new squigs or you're going to struggle in a lot of games. A little bit of a digression there. I apologize. Going back to what we see on the screen here, in 8th edition, when you had sustained hits, you could really spike. And I understand that the volume of dice that you throw is higher on average and a little bit more consistent. But losing sustained really took that fun spikiness out of the army. They do move pretty well at 8 inches. They're not terrible. I'm sure they're right in line with a lot of the other walkers out there. Being T9 with a 2-up save means that, for the most part, you're not just instantly picking them up into a lot of armies. Now, don't get me wrong, there's going to be some that are just going to point something at it and you pick it up. And that's just what it is. You can't do anything about that. But generally speaking, if you can play terrain well, you'll effectively have a 1-up save because of cover. And they'll have to dedicate like if you're playing against Dark Eldar, for example, they're going to have to probably put more than one Ravager into it to kill it, just because of the way cover works and etc. So, all in all, it's got a kind of middle of the road durability chassis. It's not bad. I will say that just like so many other things in the Ork Index, you can't run a single unit of them. If you bring one, don't expect it to do anything. That's kind of how they were in 8th and kind of how they were in 9th. If you wanted your units to perform the way they were supposed to, you have to bring 2. Not for the redundancy of oh, I need 2 because they're so good, but more just because, man, they just die. They're super swingy. You bring 2, and then one of them will perform, and then one of them doesn't. I've been personally running 3 the last few games I've played. I put 1 or 2 in reserves depending on the game. And then I do that with the intent of rapid ingressing one of them, but I don't always do that. I do plan for that with my CP usage, but I will say getting back into my Orks lately has been in some ways a reprieve from the intense resource management that the Drukhari is. So having Gretchen on an objective on a 4-up, I gain an extra command point means I am playing with more command points than I ever was with Drukhari. I have been running either 2 or 3 claws, like I said, with 1 or 2 scorches. And what ends up usually happening is that my opponent tries to screen them out with some bigger things. They're not going to leave, again, playing against some of the Craft Worlds players locally, they're not going to leave just a unit of Guardians back there to screen. Because even though I'm only getting 1 or 2 D6 auto hits, if I spike, I could do a lot of damage. And if I make the charge roll also, that's it. We're done. So it's one of those, unless they're playing a very vehicle-heavy list, they're going to be screening with things that are a little bit chunkier than just some T3 or T4 one wound bodies. And the other thing that I've been trying to do the last few games is I've been trying to wait till turn 3 to declare my WA, and that's been a conscious effort. For those of you that have watched my videos all throughout ninth and into 10th, you know that generally speaking, I'm a turn 2 WA player, and I think honestly most Orc players are. And one of the things that playing Drukhari has helped me with is to understand how to play the late game a little bit better. So what I've been trying to do going back into the Orc Index is, hey, how do I make sure I can use my WA turn 3? So I've been playing a little bit more timid 1 and 2. It's been interesting. I've done very well with it so far. I'm going to continue that mindset as I move forward with 40k and my Orcs. And, the reason for that is trying to hold my WA until turn 3. I can get those Deff Dreads on the table out of reserves if I have them, and then they'll get the advance in charge. So it's more just to maximize on everything I have, being able to utilize the WA. Let's talk about the Deff Dread and how I think we can fix it. First of all, I think the chassis is pretty solid. Like I said, it's T9. I'd like to maybe see it hit T10. But really T9 and 8 wounds and a 2-up save, I can't really gripe about it too much. The 6-up invuln, like I said, it's okay, but it doesn't really come into play too often. The new Tau detachment, arguably it does. And there's a couple other interactions where it's like, okay, I'm going to need this because probably Votan. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. But having that 6-up invuln, it's handy. I don't necessarily need it. What I'd like to see is maybe they lose the invuln and then maybe get the battle wagon ability where they reduce incoming AP, or maybe they just keep the invuln or it goes to a 5-up. I don't know. It's just having a 2-up save in 10th edition with a 6-up invuln is kind of weird. Maybe a 6-up feel no pain would be arguably better, but again, all in all, I can't bitch. Most of the issues that I see with the Deff Dread actually stem from just the issues in the index. There's not a lot of good options for anti-tank shooting. There's not a lot of good options for anti-tank melee. A lot of it is just like throwing a million dice and hoping that you can do something. And, the lack of assault weapons. There's not a lot of high AP. So it's not a Deff Dread specific issue, and I'm not saying Orcs are bad. I'm not saying Orcs are good. I'm simply saying the lack of viable options for these specific types of targets is the biggest complaint. When for 2 editions, rockets have been our premier anti-tank weapon, and now we get into 10th edition, and rockets are honestly barely anti-infantry weapons. They don't really do anything now. It's just one of those where it's like, maybe some tweaking needs done with some of the weapons. Like rockets really should be strength 10. Maybe if they stay 9, they go neg 3. Things like that. Aside from changing ranged weapon profiles, like I said, I'd like to change its ability because its ability, I love Incubi. Their datasheet is actually pretty good. I hate their ability. I hate the Deff Dread ability. It just doesn't do anything most games. And for the points that you're paying for a Deff Dread, they need a more consistent ability. They're 130 points right now. And for 130 points, you're paying really for guns that aren't going to do much most games. So really what needs to happen is their ability needs to change, And what I'd like to see is maybe like a +1 attack, bonus AP on the charge, or maybe like a once per game advance in charge, or a once per game bonus WA, so they get like 2 turns of 5-up invuln. Like these are the things I'd like to maybe see for the Deff Dread. I don't think it's happening, although I do think the Orc Index is getting reworked, which is why we've been so delayed on the Orc Codex. I think some data sheets are changing. I know there's some rumors on the new detachments and stuff like that, but I do think overall Orcs are getting a bit of a rework, not because they've been good or bad, but just because they haven't really done anything. You've got a handful of units that are a lot of fun and pretty good and like see table time, but that is one of the biggest indexes in the game, and there's not a lot of variety in competitive lists. So I'd like to see also the melee go to strength 11 or 12 base and neg 3 if the ability doesn't change. So if they don't get like so if they get bonus attack, bonus AP on the charge, if that becomes their ability, they don't need any bonus AP on their melee. Like, because then on the charge they're at neg 3. But I would like to see a strength 11, strength 12, because that's another thing that I've seen in the Orc index when compared to even just other indexes. I've seen non-shooting armies like Votann, and their melee options just outperform Orc melee options. Like, Berserks just have better melee attacks than Mega Knobs. And it's one of those where it's like, I'll pay the extra points, just stop giving me shit, right? So again, that's what I'd like to see is maybe the attacks go to 11 or 12 base, and then if there's no change to the abilities, I'd like to see them go to AP 3/3 damage, because there's not a lot of point in putting guns on the Deff Dreads. You know, it's one of those where orc shooting has historically been bad, but at least in 8th edition it was fun. 9th edition there was a brief period where it was good, uh, but it was very short-lived because of the aircraft nerf. And I just want to see the orcs go back to just kind of being fun. They don't have to be good, just make them fun. Like, if you can't make them good, make them silly, right? Overall, like I said, I think it's a solid chassis. In its current state, I think it needs to go down maybe 5 or 10 points. They're 130 now, and if they were like really probably a little bit more than that. If they were like 110, I could justify it. Because one of the biggest issues also is that coming from 9th to 10th, you can only take one in a unit. You know, in 8th, you could take 1 to 3. In 9th, you could take 1 to 3. In 10th, you only get 1. And having that interaction means you're only able to take up to 3. And Deff Dreads aren't good in low numbers, just like so many other things with Orcs. They become good when you can bring them en masse. So if I could bring like 6 Deff Dreads, even if it costs me 600 or 700 points, that drastically changes the way they interact with the game. Because while they don't stay on the table super long, you can't kill them all fast enough to make them not interact the whole game. If they bring back the squadron rules, you could probably just leave them where they're at in terms of points. I do still think it does have play. I think competitive lists could use them. They do require a specific type of usage and a specific pilot. Like this isn't a unit you put on the table and go, I'm putting this on because it's good. It's a unit you put on the table and you say, hey, I really like Deff Dreads. I'm going to put them on the table. Let's figure out how we can make them work. And overall, I'm going to rate them, like if, on a scale of 1 to 5, we're going to give them 3 out of 5 teeth. It's not terrible. It does have some play, but it could be better. And honestly, like I said, most of its problems stem from just the way the index was written and not the datasheet itself. The only gripe I have about the datasheet is just their ability. You tweak their ability, and then really most of their issues are just, hey, the Orc index, a lot of their attacks, kind of underwhelming. So, again, thanks for listening. I appreciate everybody. Sorry if I've been a little scatterbrained. Had a lot going on. Before we go, we're going to give a big shout out to Kevin, our YouTube member. I appreciate you, buddy. And then our hatchling, the real Donnie G. You're the real OG friend. Phoenix, Jamie, appreciate your support. You are fantastic. And then our immortals, Lord Wellingstone, Danny Boy, and Captain Too Tall. Thanks a lot. You guys are also amazing. And then links on the screen, links in the description. Everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.